Hi guys, welcome back. Welcome to the FSX 404 channel. Today we're going to do an approach into Kite. Really quick, for my FS9 I am using the 9 Dragons Kite scenery. The 9 Dragons scenery comes in with the approaches available into Kite. These approaches are not available in the default FS9. So some of you guys that are already familiar with the FSX and the Kite scenery and how that works, would you please post a comment and let the rest of these guys that have FSX know where to go and get that scenery and where to go and get those approaches so they can do this approach. I would appreciate that very much, thank you. Today we're going to do the Kite IGS Runway 13 approach. The instrument guidance system is very similar to the ILS approach. It has a localizer and it has a glide slope, and the approach will bring you to a point where the pilot eventually will switch to visual, but pilot will also have to maneuver the airplane to put it into the position to land. And of course that maneuver at Kite is that last famous turn that we all know and we all love. The first thing that stands out from the Kite IGS 13 approach plate is that it does not have an IAF, it does not have initial approach fix. Since there is no IAF, there are two ways we can do this approach. The first way and the proper way to do this is to use the arrival part of the approach plate. So just as what we did for the Madeira approach, we'll have to go to the arrival part of the approach plate to find out our entry points. From the arrival part of the approach plate, we can see there are many arrival routes, and all of them bring us to one point. And that point seems to be the Chung Chau VOR 112.3. And if you had SID stars or GPS, you can put in these points and then from these points fly to the Chung Chau VOR and proceed with the rest of the approach. The second way to do this approach is not really a proper way to do it, but it will work every time. For the second part, what we would do is we would create our own IAF, our own initial approach fix. Just speaking from experience, I know that missed approach holding points are not chosen randomly. They are positioned in a way so that the airplane that has done a missed approach and is holding at the missed approach point can easily get itself back to the beginning of the approach. So in a way, the missed approach point, the missed approach holding point, is a good way to start your approach. And because we don't have an IAF for Kite, for Flight Simulator, we can use the Kite IGS 13 missed approach point, which is the Tatong VOR, as our initial approach fix. So as we reach the Tatong VOR, we're going to put ourselves into flying a radial of 268 from the Tatong VOR. The radial of 268 from Tatong VOR will bring us right to the Chung Chau VOR. Then from Chung Chau VOR, we'll start our approach at flying a radial of 270 and do the rest of the approach. Why don't we just fly straight to the Chung Chau VOR from any direction and just head out on a 270 radial and continue the approach? The reason being is that we only have 7 miles to get ourselves on that 270 radial from Chung Chau VOR, and when you're flying 180 knots to 200 knots approach speeds, that may not be enough space to put us on a radial of 270, especially if we're coming from sharp angles. So what we're going to do, we'll fly to Tatong VOR, we'll intercept a radial of 268 to the Chung Chau VOR, and then from Chung Chau VOR, we'll begin our approach. We will reach the Chung Chau VOR at 8,000 feet. Once we reach the Chung Chau VOR at 8,000 feet, we'll fly a radial of 270 from the Chung Chau VOR. And as we overfly the Chung Chau VOR at that 8,000 feet, we'll begin to descend down to 6,000 feet. We'll maintain 6,000 feet until we reach the point that is on a radial of 270 from the Chung Chau VOR at a distance of 7 miles. This point is called Point Gulf. From Point Gulf, we'll start a right turn to intercept the localizer. Now, there are two ways to do this turn. The first way to do this turn is that if we're flying an approach at 180 knots or above, we'll automatically turn to a heading of 045 and intercept the localizer. The second way to do this turn is that if we're flying our approach at below 180 knots, first we need to turn to the shallow 1 NDB, and then after overflying the shallow 1 NDB, we'll turn to a heading of 045 until we intercept the localizer. This is done so we can avoid these 4,100 foot hills or mountains which would be in our way. Once we intercept the localizer, we'll fly a heading of 088 until we either switch to visual or we do a missed approach. Now there's one more thing that we need to remember after starting our turn from the Point Gulf. As we overfly the Point Gulf and we start that right turn to intercept the localizer, we're going to start a descent from 6,000 feet down to 4,500 feet. We will do this for either turn, whether we're above or below 180 knots. Once we reach 4,500 feet, we'll maintain 4,500 feet until we intercept the glide slope. Now, so far in this series we haven't done any glide slopes, but there's an easy way to follow the glide slope. First, we have to find out what our approach glide slope pitch is. The glide slope pitch for this approach is 3.1 degrees. Why do we need this? We're going to use this 3.1 degrees glide slope pitch to find out what our rate of descent needs to be. If we look at a rate of descent cheat sheet, we can see that for our 3.1 degree glide slope and a ground speed of 165 to 175 knots, our rate of descent needs to be around 950 feet per minute to maintain the glide slope needle centered. So once we turn to intercept the localizer and we intercept the glide slope, we'll put our plane in a 950 foot per minute descent. One more thing to remember about approaches that have glide slopes is that the point where we intercept our glide slope at our given altitude, in this case 4,500 feet, that is our final approach fix. Of course, we know that our final approach fix, we're going to lower our landing gear and do the pre-landing checklist. There are a few more things we need to note about the IGS-13 Kite approach. One is that we will overfly the outer marker while we're on the localizer. If we have flown our approach correctly, we should be around 1,770 feet when we're over the outer marker. Why is this needed? Because we are flying a plane over a very congested area. The outer marker serves as a check on our instruments. Let's say for some reason the glide slope needle has malfunctioned. On a foggy day, if we get distracted, we can fly this plane into the ground, right in the middle of a busy city. With this outer marker, we know that we need to be at around 1,750 feet when that outer marker alarm goes off. So it serves as a backup on our instruments and a check on our position. The second reason for the outer marker being placed where it is that we can actually do this approach without the glide slope. We can do this approach as a step-down descent. And just in case our airplane does not have a glide slope, at the point we intercept our localizer at 4,500 feet, we can start a descent down to 1,770 feet until we reach the outer marker. Upon reaching the outer marker, we can start a descent down to our decision height, which is 660 feet, until we reach the middle marker. At the same time, if we're doing a step-down descent, we also have this little chart here that gives us our ground speed and our time from our outer marker until the middle marker when we have to do our missed approach. So if we're doing a step-down descent, once we are over the outer marker, we can start a timer, and at a speed of 160 knots, we have 1 minute and 21 seconds until we get to the middle marker. We pick up the runway or the runway lights visually and we land. If at 1 minute 21 seconds we don't see the runway or the runway lights and we're at our decision height of 660 feet, we need to do a missed approach. The last thing we need to remember about the IGS-13 approach is that our missed approach point is the middle marker. If we're over the middle marker and at our decision height of 660 feet and we don't have the runway or the runway lights in sight, we need to do a missed approach. The missed approach for Kite is very simple. We'll climb to 4,500, intercept a heading of 135 to the Tatong VOR, and we'll hold over the Tatong VOR. As far as the flying the approach part of this video, we would have flown to the Tatong VOR. From the Tatong VOR, we're going to fly to the Chunchao VOR. We're going to overfly the Chunchao VOR at 8,000 feet, and we're going to start our descent and get ourselves on a radial of 270 from the Chunchao VOR. Because of time constrictions, and you guys already know how to fly VOR to VOR, we're going to pick up this flight right after overflying the Chunchao VOR at 8,000 feet and descending. The plane we're going to use today will be a classic airplane for a classic airport. We'll fly a Flight 1 Dream Fleet Boeing 727, so let's get ourselves into the plane and fly the approach.